The conference table in boardroom A was made from a single slab of black walnut. I had picked it out myself in a showroom in Chicago 7 years into building the company. I remember thinking, this is the kind of table where real decisions get made. I was proud of it. I was sitting at the far end of that table when they voted me out. There were 9 board members. I was one of them. My original co-founder, James Osei, was another. The remaining 7 had come in through 2 rounds of venture financing, professionals with spreadsheets and quarterly expectations, and, I would come to understand too late, a very specific idea of what a company was supposed to look like once it got big enough to be worth protecting. Victor Crane spoke first. He had been our CFO for 9 years and my college friend for 14 years before that. He wore a charcoal suit I had seen him wear 100 times. He looked calm. He had clearly practiced this. The board's position, Victor said, setting both palms flat on the walnut table, is that CorePath Technologies has reached an inflection point. 100 million in ARR is not a startup milestone. It's a market position. And market positions require a different kind of leadership than the one that got us here. I listened. I had learned, over 12 years of building this company, that the most dangerous thing you can do in a room full of people who are about to do something to you is to speak first. Sandra Way was sitting to Victor's left. She was the managing partner of Aldervane Capital, the lead investor in our Series A. She had told me, in 2013, when she handed me a check for $4.5 million, that she wasn't just investing in the product. She was investing in me. I had believed her. I had liked believing her. I am the kind of person who wants to believe that sentences like that are true. She did not look at me now. The motion was read into the record. The proposal was to remove me as CEO and appoint Marcus Dole, a man I had met twice, a former executive from a mid-sized enterprise software company in Denver, as my replacement, effective in 30 days. I'd like to say something, I said. Victor said, of course. I looked down the table. 7 faces I had spent years trusting. James at the other end, staring at the surface of the walnut table I had picked out. Not at me. CorePath exists because I built it, I said. Every client on our roster came through a relationship I built or a product my team built under my direction. The company hit $100 million in revenue last quarter. Last quarter. And you're telling me that the year we hit 100 million is the year we need someone else. No one spoke. I looked at James. He didn't look up. Victor, I said. How long has this been in discussion? Victor's jaw moved slightly before he answered. The board has been in dialogue about succession planning for approximately 3 months. 3 months. Victor had sat across from me at lunch every other Tuesday for 3 months. He had texted me about his daughter's recital. He had asked me to proofread his remarks for our Q3 all-hands meeting. 3 months. The vote was called. It went 8-1. I was the one. James Osei voted with the board. He did not look up from the table when he raised his hand. I drove home in the rain. I sat in my car outside my house for 45 minutes before going inside. I didn't cry. I wasn't sure what I felt. It was something more like being very, very still, in a place where everything that was supposed to be solid had turned out to be painted on. 12 years earlier, I had $2,200 in a checking account and a business plan written on napkins. I should start there. My name is Daniel Holt. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the second of 3 kids. My father drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain for 31 years. My mother was a school nurse. We were not poor in the way that makes a good story, and not comfortable in the way that makes a forgettable one. We were the kind of middle American working family that keeps the country moving and rarely gets thanked for it. I went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and studied supply chain management, which is a discipline that most people learn about and immediately fall asleep. I never fell asleep. I had grown up watching my father describe, over dinner, the specific ways in which the logistics industry operated as though it were still 1978. Paper manifests, phone-based dispatch, routing decisions made on gut and habit rather than data. He would come home exhausted and I would watch him and think, someone is going to fix this eventually. I wanted to be that someone. After graduation, I took a job with a freight brokerage in Columbus. I was good at it immediately, which surprised everyone except me. I understood the inefficiency from the inside now, and I saw exactly where the waste was. It was in the gap between what carriers could offer and what shippers actually knew was available. A communication problem masquerading as a capacity problem. Software could fix it. The right software, built by someone who actually understood the workflow, could save the industry billions of dollars a year and make whoever built it very comfortable in the process. I quit the brokerage after 3 years with $2,200 in savings, a laptop, and 40 pages of notes I had been keeping in a series of legal pads. I also had James Osei, who had been my roommate at Ohio State and was at the time the best programmer I had ever met. We both believed, with the uncomplicated certainty of people who have not yet failed at anything, that we were going to build something that mattered. Our first office was a converted storage unit in a self-storage complex outside of Columbus. We paid $140 a month. We had an extension cord running from the facility's main building to power our space heater and 2 laptops. James built. I sold. We ate a lot of peanut butter. We were genuinely happy. We called the company CorePath Technologies. The name came from a late-night argument about what the product actually was at its core, a routing platform, a communication layer, or something else. We settled on the path, the thing that connects where something is to where it needs to be. Our first client was a mid-sized trucking company in northern Ohio called Hartman Freight. They had 22 trucks and a scheduling problem that was costing them an estimated $180,000 a year in empty miles. We signed them at $3,200 a month, our first recurring revenue. I remember driving home that night and having to pull over because my hands were shaking. I sat on the side of a county road in Ohio and called my father and told him what we had done. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Good, keep going." That was the right thing to say. By year 3, we had 11 clients, 12 employees, and roughly $1.1 M in annual recurring revenue. We were growing. We needed money. We needed someone who understood money, because James understood code and I understood clients, and neither of us understood capital structure the way we needed to. Victor Crane had been 2 years ahead of me at Ohio State. I had known him peripherally, the kind of person you remember as competent and slightly too polished for their age. He reached out through a mutual connection after reading about us in a regional business journal. He took me to lunch, asked questions for 2.5 hours, and at the end said, "You don't need a CFO yet. You need someone who can think like an investor so you can stay thinking like a founder. Let me help you." I said yes. I should not have said yes so quickly. But I was 29 and I trusted competence, and Victor was, without question, competent. He was very, very good at his job. That is the part I want you to understand. Whatever else he was, Victor Crane was genuinely excellent at what he did. He tightened our finances, restructured our pricing, identified 3 contract inefficiencies that were bleeding margin we didn't know we were losing. He made CorePath more fundable. Within 18 months of Victor joining, we closed our Series A, $4.5 million from Aldervane Capital. Sandra Way shook my hand across a conference table and said, "I'm not just investing in the product. I'm investing in you." I believed her. I want you to know I believed her completely. The 6 years between the Series A and the day they voted me out were, by every measurable standard, a success. We grew from $1.1 MAR at the time of Series A to $47 MAR by year 7. We ran a Series B, $22 M, from a consortium of investors, including Aldervane doubling down, and used it to build out an enterprise sales team and a customer success organization. We moved from the storage unit to a proper office in Columbus, then to a bigger one, then to a building in Cincinnati that had our name on the lobby in brushed steel letters. I walked past those letters every morning for 4 years, and I never stopped finding them remarkable. I hired 140 people over those 6 years. I knew most of their names. I attended their wedding receptions and their going away parties and their baby showers. I wrote handwritten notes when people hit their 5-year anniversaries with the company, because my father had worked for the same employer for 31 years and not once received a handwritten note, and I thought about that more than I ever said out loud. During this period, Victor Crane became increasingly indispensable. He ran our board relationships, which I found exhausting, and he seemed to find energizing. He sat on every investor call. He became the voice of operational discipline in every strategic discussion, which was useful when I was being idealistic about growth timelines, and less useful when I was right about them. There were moments, small ones, easy to dismiss, when I would finish explaining a product vision and look at Victor, and he would already be looking at the board members instead of me, reading the room instead of listening to the idea. I dismissed those moments. I thought, this is what good CFOs do. They translate founder vision into investor confidence. This is his job. He's doing his job. I was right that he was doing a job. I had misidentified what it was. By year 9, Victor had been promoted to president. He had his own EA, his own section of the leadership team that reported to him rather than directly to me, his own rhythm of board communication that I was theoretically looped into and practically excluded from. I signed off on all of this because I trusted him, because he had been my college friend for 14 years, because I was busy closing a Fortune 500 contract in Dallas and a partnership deal in Toronto, and I told myself that trusting good people to run things was what leaders did. Sandra Way started missing my calls around year 10. I noticed. I told myself she was busy. Aldervane had a portfolio of 63 companies. She couldn't be on the phone with all of us. Year 11, Kutwo. CorePath Technologies crossed $100 in annual recurring revenue. I was on a flight back from closing our biggest contract to date, a full logistics intelligence platform deployment with a national retail chain, when Victor called my personal cell at 11 p.m. "We need to talk about the future of the company," he said. I thought he's finally ready to discuss the IPO timeline. I had been pushing for it for 2 years. I thought, this is the moment where everything accelerates. I said, I land at 7. Breakfast tomorrow. He said, I need to tell you something now. He told me. I sat in a window seat at 31,000 feet, and I listened to my college friend of 14 years explain that the board had been in dialogue, his word dialogue, for 3 months about whether CorePath had outgrown its current leadership structure. I listened to him explain that Marcus Dole had been identified as a replacement candidate, had already had 3 preliminary conversations with the board, and that a formal vote was expected within the week. I asked him one question. Did you initiate this, or did the board? There was a pause, the specific length and texture of a pause that tells you everything. The board asked me, Victor said, for my honest assessment. And your honest assessment was that I should go. My honest assessment was that the company needed different strengths going forward. I hung up. I looked out the window at the darkness. Below us, somewhere, was the country that CorePath software was helping to move. 43,000 loads a month, matched to carriers, routed efficiently, tracked in real time. I had built that. We had built that, James and I, in a storage unit with an extension cord. I sat in that seat for the remaining hour of the flight, and I made a decision. Not about revenge. About attention. I had been paying attention to the wrong things for 3 years. Starting now, I would not make that mistake again. The 30 days between the vote and my last day at CorePath were the strangest of my professional life. I was still technically the CEO. I attended 2 all-hands meetings. I sat in a performance review for a sales manager I had hired 3 years earlier. I signed expense reports. I walked past the brushed steel letters in the lobby every morning and tried to look like a person who did not know exactly what they meant now. Marcus Dole started on a Wednesday. We had a handover meeting that lasted 90 minutes and felt like a property transfer. He was professionally pleasant. He used the word synergies without irony. He had no idea what he was inheriting, and I could see it in the way he asked questions, the questions of someone who understands the category of a thing, but not the thing itself. I wished him well, and I meant it technically. I meant that I genuinely hoped he would not destroy what I had built. That hope would in time prove optimistic. My severance package, $2.1 million paid over 18 months. My equity stake, originally 28% and diluted through funding rounds to 6.2%, was frozen at current valuation as of my departure date. It was worth something. It was not, at the time, enough to feel like enough. I went home. My wife Rachel had held things together during the 30-day limbo with a quality I can only describe as fierce gentleness. She was steady for me in a way I did not deserve and could not fully receive. She made dinner every night. She asked questions about what I was thinking and listened to the answers. She did not say, I told you so about Victor, though she had told me so about Victor, or at least about the pattern of something she had been watching for years without being able to name precisely. But I went dark. I am not using that as a metaphor. I withdrew. I drank, not dramatically, not in the way that makes people intervene, but steadily and consistently in the manner of someone who has decided that the distance alcohol creates from his own thoughts is preferable to the thoughts. I stopped returning calls. I started watching financial news at 3 in the morning, tracking CorePath's performance under Marcus Dole with the specific masochistic attention of a person who cannot look away from a slow disaster they predicted. I stopped being someone Rachel could reach. 14 months after the vote, she packed a bag. Not in anger. That's the part I need you to understand. Not dramatically. She did it on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, and she came in and sat across from me and said very quietly, I can't watch you disappear. I've been trying to pull you back for over a year, and I can't do it anymore. I did not argue. I did not ask her to stay. I sat there and I let her go because I had nothing left to offer her, and I knew it and she knew it, and we both loved each other enough to understand that love is not the same thing as viability. She left. I sold the house. After the settlement and the taxes and the severance running out, I had $340,000 in a savings account and a $680 a month studio apartment, and no particular reason to get out of bed in the morning. One night, I don't know what month it was, I had largely stopped tracking months. I drove past the CorePath building. They had rebranded under Marcus Dole. The building now said Apex Logistics Group in the same brushed steel letters where CorePath had been. He had renamed my company. He had taken the name off the thing I had built and put his own word on it. I parked across the street. I sat there and watched the lights go off, floor by floor, as people went home for the night, until only the lobby was lit and the building was mostly dark. I sat with that for a while. And then something that had been frozen in me for 14 months began very quietly to move. Here is what I knew at 41 years old, sitting in a studio apartment with $340,000 and 12 years of logistics industry knowledge. I knew where every inefficiency was. I had spent a decade solving them for other people's companies, and then had CorePath built underneath me. I knew what the product should have become. I had the roadmap in my head. I had written it down 100 times. I had fought for pieces of it in board meetings and been overruled in the name of focusing on what's working. I knew, specifically and precisely, what a better version of what I had built would look like. I also knew that I did not want to start from zero again, not the way I had in the storage unit. I was not 27 years old with nothing to lose and everything to prove. I was 41 with $340,000 and a very specific mission, and the fastest path was not to build from scratch, but to buy something broken and fix it fast. I found Ridgeline Freight through a broker in Memphis. It was a logistics brokerage with 14 employees, a client base of about 40 small and mid-sized shippers, and a technology stack that could most charitably be described as functional in 2009. They were doing approximately $2.3 M in annual revenue and losing $180,000 a year. The owner, a man named Curtis Hayward, who had founded the business with his brother 20 years earlier and had watched it slowly calcify while the industry moved past it, wanted out. He had been trying to sell for 2 years. I bought Ridgeline Freight for $280,000. I paid cash. Curtis shook my hand and said, "Good luck. You're going to need better software." I said, "I know." I did not fire anyone. I want to be specific about this because it matters to me. All 14 employees kept their jobs. What I did instead was spend the next 4 months building the software that would replace their manual processes. The same architecture I had built CorePath on, but 7 years more advanced, stripped of the compromises I had been forced to make for board approval, built exactly the way I had always wanted to build it, and had always been told was premature. I worked 16-hour days in a spare bedroom I had converted into an office. I did not take a salary for 18 months. I ate the same things I had eaten in the storage unit: peanut butter, black coffee, the occasional takeout container that I would finish standing over the kitchen sink at midnight. I was, in a way that I had not been since the very beginning, completely alone with a problem I was determined to solve. What I built was not a copy of CorePath. It was the thing CorePath should have become. It handled real-time carrier matching at a sophistication that nothing else on the market could match, with a predictive routing layer that could identify optimal load configurations 48 hours in advance. It was objectively better. I knew it was better because I knew every line of CorePath's codebase by implication, and I knew every shortcut and compromise in it, and I had not made any of them this time. Year one of Ridgeline under my ownership, $1.8 M in revenue. A step backward from where we started on paper, but the paper didn't account for what I was building underneath it. Year two, $4.4 M. But the software was live. Clients who had been with Ridgeline for a decade started calling their contacts to tell them about it. The word of mouth was the same word of mouth I had watched happen at CorePath in the early years. The particular velocity of people who have been waiting for something to exist, finally discovering that it does. I did not celebrate either of these milestones. I was not building toward a celebration. I was building toward something more specific. Year three of Ridgeline. A call comes from a procurement director at Westbrook Distribution, a Fortune 500 supply chain company headquartered in Atlanta. His name is Tom Ayers. I had met him once briefly at an industry conference 4 years earlier, before everything, when he was touring CorePath's booth and I was the one explaining the product. He had not signed with CorePath at the time. Westbrook had eventually come on as a client 2 years after I left, negotiated by Marcus Dole's enterprise sales team, and, according to what Tom told me later, handled badly enough that the renewal conversation had become a dispute. Tom did not call because he knew I had built something. He called because someone at a mid-sized shipper in Tennessee had mentioned Ridgeline's name, and he had looked us up, and the product demo he watched on our website had stopped him cold. He flew to Memphis. We sat across from each other in the modest conference room of a logistics brokerage that had 14 employees and a revenue base that was 1/40th the size of what he was used to talking to. He looked at our office with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to judge things by their packaging. I didn't know you'd left CorePath, he said. I built something better, I said. We spent 3 hours in that room. He asked every question I would have asked. He pushed back on the predictive routing claims, and I walked him through the data. 18 months of real load performance from Ridgeline's own operations, before and after the software integration, with an accuracy rate that CorePath's routing engine, at its best, had never achieved. Tom was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said, "What does a full deployment look like for an operation our size?" The contract was $14 million over 3 years. Ridgeline's entire revenue that year up to that point had been $4.4 million. I signed the Westbrook agreement on a Thursday afternoon, and then drove to a parking lot and sat in my car and did not cry, but felt something in my chest that was adjacent to it. The specific sensation of watching something you built for a long time finally make contact with the world at the scale you always believed it deserved. 3 days after the contract was announced in a press release, a modest one, mentioning the Westbrook partnership without disclosing the full contract value, my phone rang. A number I recognized. Victor Crane. I looked at the screen for 4 rings. Then I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. Congratulations on the Westbrook deal. Maybe we should talk. There might be opportunities for alignment between Ridgeline and Apex. He would love to reconnect. I listened to it once and deleted it. I was not ready to deal with Victor yet, not because I was afraid of him, because I had a very specific idea of what dealing with Victor would look like, and I needed Ridgeline to be bigger first. Here is what had happened to Apex Logistics Group, the company formerly known as CorePath, while I was in Memphis rebuilding. Marcus Dole had done what capable people who don't understand a business do when handed a successful one. He had optimized it for the next 12 months. He cut the product team by 30% in year one to improve EBITDA margins. He restructured the sales compensation in a way that incentivized big new logos over account expansion, which felt smart on a dashboard and was disastrous on the ground. He rebranded, new name, new logo, new website, spending $2.3 M on a positioning overhaul that none of the existing clients had asked for, and that communicated to anyone paying attention that the company had decided to become something different without being clear about what. The platform he inherited was CorePath software, the software I had built. He did not invest meaningfully in its development. He invested in the sales layer above it. By year 3 of his tenure, 2 things were happening simultaneously. Apex was signing new clients at a rate that looked good in the press releases, and existing clients were leaving at a rate that was being quietly absorbed in the reporting methodology. Westbrook leaving was a symptom, not the disease, but it was a visible symptom, and Tom Ayers telling the industry about what he'd found at Ridgeline was the kind of word of mouth that does not stay quiet. By year 4 of Ridgeline, I had $67 M in revenue. I had 48 employees. I had a head of sales I trusted and a customer success team that had posted 97% client retention for 2 consecutive years. I had also, quietly and deliberately, hired a journalist named Carol Park as a communications consultant, not to write press releases, but to help me understand what a comprehensive profile of Ridgeline's story would look like and where it would be published. Carol told me the piece would write itself. The angle was obvious. The man Apex Logistics had fired had built their biggest and fastest growing competitor. She had been approached by 2 national business publications already. She was waiting, she said, for a reason to move forward. I told her to keep waiting. I had one conversation to have first. Sandra Way called me in early October of year 4. Not through her assistant. Her personal number. She asked if I had time to meet. I said yes. I flew to San Francisco. We sat in the Aldervane Capitol conference room, a room that looked almost exactly like the CorePath boardroom. Same category of furniture, same category of view. And she looked at me across the table with the expression of someone who has done a calculation and arrived at a number they find uncomfortable. Ridgeline is impressive, she said. Genuinely. I want to say that first. Thank you, I said. We'd like to discuss an investment. Aldervane is prepared to offer $20 million in growth capital at a post-money valuation of. I know why you're here, I said. She stopped. Apex's ARR has been declining at approximately 8% quarter over quarter for the last 6 quarters, I said. Aldervane's stake at current trajectory will be worth 40% of what it was at your entry point within 18 months. You want to get ahead of that by repositioning into Ridgeline. She didn't deny it. That was one of the things I had always respected about Sandra Way. She didn't waste time on denials when the evidence was complete. Business is business, Daniel, she said. Yes, I said. I slid a folder across the table. Inside the folder were 3 documents. The first was a full buyout offer for Aldervane's equity stake in Apex Logistics Group at a 40% discount to current market value. The second was a signed letter of intent from Westbrook Distribution confirming their intent to expand their Ridgeline deployment, which would, when announced, remove approximately 23% of Apex's ARR from their client roster in a single quarter. The third was a copy of the board meeting minutes from CorePath session 3 months before the vote, the session where the succession plan was first formally discussed, the session where Victor Crane had presented his honest assessment without my knowledge. I had obtained the minutes through a lawyer and a very specific clause in my original shareholder agreement that I had insisted on in year 2, and that no one had thought would matter. Sign the acquisition on my terms, I said, or the Westbrook expansion gets announced next week, and I give Carol Park the board minutes tomorrow. Sandra Way looked at the folder. She looked at me. She picked up a pen. She signed. What followed was not a dramatic implosion. It was a steady, technical, inexorable dissolution, the way a building comes down when the structural engineers are involved, and not the demolition crew. Floor by floor. No explosion. Just the quiet arithmetic of weight without support. The Westbrook expansion was announced. Apex lost the account entirely within 60 days. Westbrook moved their full tech stack to Ridgeline, citing platform superiority and a transition credit we offered that made the math obvious. 3 other enterprise clients began renewal conversations with us within the month. Not because I had recruited them, because word travels. Marcus Dole resigned in February. The severance dispute leaked to the press. His contract had a performance clause that the board argued had not been met, and he argued the metrics had been retroactively redefined. Both things were probably true. It became a story in 2 trade publications, and then a slightly larger story in a business daily that picked it up. Victor Crane was ousted by the board in March. I want to sit with that for a moment. The mechanism that removed him was identical to the mechanism he had used on me. A board decision made over several months of private consultation, framed as the company needing different strengths going forward. I had not orchestrated this. I had not needed to. When organizations begin to fail, they look for someone to assign the failure to, and they always find someone who is holding something. Victor called me twice during this period. I did not answer either call. Apex Logistics Group was in distress by summer. They had 6 months of cash runway. They were in conversation with 3 potential acquirers. None of the conversations were on favorable terms. I was tracking all of this through Carol Park's reporting and through sources inside the company I had carefully not cultivated, but who found me anyway. People who remembered what it had been like when it was CorePath. People who wanted to be somewhere that was building rather than dissolving. I hired 11 of them. I want to be honest. I interviewed each one, and the hire decisions were based on their qualifications, not on the symmetry of the situation. But I would be lying if I said there was no satisfaction in it. There was. I am not interested in pretending otherwise. And then James Osei called. I had not spoken to him in more than 4 years. Not since the vote. He had stayed at Apex through the entire tenure of Marcus Dole, first as CTO, then in a diminished role as the new management team slowly replaced the technical leadership with people who were more comfortable with uncertainty and less capable of solving it. He called on a Wednesday evening. I let it ring twice before I answered. Daniel, he said. James. A long pause. The specific weight of 4 years of unsaid things filling a phone call. I owe you an explanation, he said. You owe me a vote, I said. You can't give that back. Another pause. Victor told me, James said slowly, that you had been planning to replace me as CTO. He said you had already identified candidates. He said you felt the technical leadership needed to evolve and that you were looking at external hires. I sat with this. When did he tell you this? About 2 months before the vote. 2 months before the vote. Victor had spent 2 months feeding James the exact information needed to guarantee his hand went up. James, I said, I never thought about replacing you. Not once. You built half of what CorePath is. what it was. The silence on the other end was a particular kind of silence. The kind that happens when someone understands the full architecture of a thing they believed for 4 years. I know that now, James said. We talked for 2 more hours. I am not going to call it forgiveness. I'm not sure that's the right word for what happened between us, and I don't want to be sentimental about it. What I will say is this. James C. had been manipulated by a person he trusted, and he had made a decision based on a lie, and he had spent 4 years watching the consequences of that decision play out. He had earned a certain kind of understanding through that. Not absolution, but understanding. I offered him the CTO role at Ridgeline, not as a gesture, not as a narrative beat, as a business decision. He was the best technical co-founder I had ever worked with, and I was preparing for something that would require the very best of what both of us could do. He said yes. We filed for our IPO on a Thursday morning in late autumn, 5 years and 8 months after I had signed the papers on Ridgeline Freight. This negative one told a story that I had lived for nearly 6 years, in the specific silence of someone who does not talk about what they are building while they are building it. The revenue figures were on page 4, $1.8 M in year 1, $4.4 M in year 2, $18.7 M in year 3. The Westbrook year, $41 M in year 4, $67 M in year 5, $94 M projected for the current fiscal year. The market cap projection at IPO $1.1 billion. My ownership stake had remained at 44.3%, protected by the governance structure James and I had designed from the beginning. We had built the capitalization table with the specific memory of what had happened when we hadn't. No single investor had more than 12% of the company. Board seats were allocated with a founder protection clause that required a supermajority to modify. We had done, in other words, the homework we should have done the first time. The night before the IPO, I sat in a hotel room in New York and tried to identify what I was feeling. It was not triumph. That surprised me a little. I had expected some version of triumph, the clean, satisfying finish of a story where the person who was wronged wins and the people who wronged him lose. The shape was there. CorePath was gone, essentially. Apex Logistics Group had sold its remaining assets to a private equity firm in the spring, at a valuation that represented roughly $0.22 on the dollar of its peak. Victor Crane was in his late 40s, running a small consulting practice, calling me twice with no answer. Sandra Way had signed a document that cost her considerably. Marcus Dole had not, as far as I could determine, landed anywhere meaningful. All of that had happened. All of it was real. But Rachel had remarried 2 years earlier. A man she met through mutual friends, a teacher, someone I knew nothing about except that she seemed happy in photographs. I was glad for her. I was genuinely glad for her, not as a performance of graciousness, but because I had loved Rachel, and loving someone includes wanting specific things for them that sometimes don't include you. I thought about my father, who had driven a delivery truck for 31 years and received no handwritten notes. He had retired now. I had called him from Memphis in the first year of Ridgeline when I was not sleeping and not taking a salary and eating peanut butter again. And he had listened and then said, exactly as he had said 20 years before, "Good. Keep going." I had thought about that sentence more times than I could count. It was the most useful thing anyone had ever said to me. I thought about the storage unit, the extension cord, the $2,200. I thought about the walnut table, the vote, the rain. I could not make those things feel small, but I could feel them in proportion. They were what had happened. They were not all of what had happened. I ordered room service, a club sandwich and sparkling water, the same thing I had ordered the night CorePath hit $100 million, alone in a hotel room in Dallas after closing the Fortune 500 deal that should have been the beginning of something. I ate it sitting on the edge of the bed. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at night. It was enough. That's what I kept coming back to, sitting there. Not everything I had wanted. Not a clean ending. But enough. The morning of the IPO, I stood on the trading floor in the specific noise of a room where money changes hands at a speed that makes human comprehension feel inadequate. James was beside me. Tom Ayers from Westbrook was in the gallery. 14 of Ridgeline's original employees, including 9 of the 14 who had been there when I bought the company from Curtis Hayward for $280,000, were on the floor. The opening bell rang. Ridgeline's ticker appeared on the board. Market capitalization, $1.1 billion. My stake, 44.3%. Value, $487 million. Someone nearby said something about the number. I heard it as though from a distance. I was thinking about the $2,200. I do that now. When large numbers appear in my life, I go back to the $2,200, not as an origin story to feel proud of, but as a measuring stick. A reminder of the actual unit of change between where something starts and where it goes, and all the specific choices and failures and recoveries that make up the distance. After the opening, during the reception that followed, a man tapped me on the arm and said, quietly, that someone in the crowd outside had been pointed out as Victor Crane, that he was apparently watching from street level, visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass. I looked. It took me a moment to find him. He was standing at the back of a group of observers behind a barrier, a little to the left of center, in a coat I didn't recognize. He was watching the floor with his hands in his pockets. I looked at him for approximately 3 seconds. I want to be precise about this. Not dramatically, not with anything that could be called a stare. 3 seconds. Then I looked away. Not as cruelty, not as a performance of indifference. I looked away because Victor Crane had become someone I had finished thinking about. He had made his calculations, and I had made mine, and the results of both sets of calculations were visible to anyone who wanted to look at them, and there was nothing left to say. James put a hand on my shoulder and said something about the afternoon call schedule. I nodded. The floor was still moving around us, the particular human current of a room where 100 things are happening simultaneously, and I was standing inside it, and for the first time in a very long time I felt correctly placed. Not triumphant, not vindicated. Correctly placed. That evening, back in my hotel room, I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. I heard, he said. It was on the news. How does it look from out there? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the television in the background. Sports, probably. He had always had sports on in the background. The sound of it hit me in some place I hadn't expected. Like you kept going, he said. We talked for an hour. Not about money or markets or the IPO or any of the specific facts of the day. About Dayton. About my brother's kids. About a restaurant near his house that had been there for 40 years and had finally closed. About small things. The category of things that turn out to be the large things after all. When I hung up, I sat for a while in the silence of the hotel room. The sparkling water from last night was still on the table, the glass half empty. I looked at it for a moment. Then I got up, rinsed the glass, and went to sleep. Not every ending is an explosion. Some endings are just the moment when the weight of a thing is finally equal to what you have become strong enough to carry. I had been carrying this weight for a long time, and I was at last exactly strong enough. Production notes. Protagonist, Daniel Holt. Antagonist, primary Victor Crane, CO president, college friend of 14 years. Antagonist, Sandra Way, Aldervane Capital, lead investor. Antagonist, tertiary, replacement CEO. Supporting Ali, co-founder CTO, flipped by Victor, later returned. Supporting, Rachel Holt, wife, eventual divorce, positive closure. Supporting external, Tom Ayers, Westbrook Distribution, the pivot moment. Supporting legacy, Daniel's father, recurring emotional anchor. Company Nimes. Original company, CorePath Technologies, rebranded by Dole to Apex Logistics Group. New company, Ridgeline Freight. Financial arc. Started, $2,200 in checking account. CorePath peak, $100 M, year 12. Severance, $2.1 M. Post-divorce taxes, $340,000. Ridgeline acquisition price, $280,000. Year 1 Ridgeline, $1.8 M revenue. Year 2, $4.4 M. Year 3, $18.7 Westbrook deal, $14 M contract. Year 4, $41. Year 5, $67. IPO market cap, $1.1 billion. Daniel's stake at IPO, 44.3%, $487 million. Hollow victory frame. Daniel wins everything measurable. The marriage is gone. Youth is gone. Some friendships are gone. But the ending is acceptance, not regret. He is correctly placed. That is enough.